Well, hello and welcome to Outdoor Oklahoma. I'm Todd Craighead. Byron State Fish Hatchery here in northwest Oklahoma is one of 4 hatcheries that our fisheries division operates. On an average year, Byron produces 25 to 30 million fish of 8 different species. Now, each hatchery around the state has a storage water reservoir, just like this one here, and it's a vital part of the whole process. Now, the hatchery is a closed water system, meaning that when the grow-out ponds need water, it's pumped up from this reservoir. Then when they drain the ponds to collect the fish, that water comes back down to this reservoir. So maintaining this reservoir from things like wind erosion, like putting riprap on it, is a vital part of the fish production process. A wildlife department with some of the hardest working fisheries professionals in the country. Just another reason to love Oklahoma and the adventures that await you.
The way a wetland differs from other bodies of water like lakes or creeks or ponds is that a wetland will go dry at some point throughout the year. It doesn't hold water, the course of a year, like a lake or a pond or something that you think of. And we get calls throughout the summer, folks will come out here and do some early teal scouting or something. They'll say, hey, there's no water in those units. And we're like, well, good. We didn't want water in them. We're trying to grow food this time of year, and that's why it's dry, and that's what makes them wetlands. Managing wetlands, water is key, and it's key really managing, native grass habitat and hardwood stands, in that with those types of habitat, you want water, right? We need a rainfall. Like last fall's drought was really tough on those different types of habitat, where in wetlands, we need that water gone. Your upland type habitats, you're hoping for rain usually, and in these wetlands, we want it out of there, and we want it to stay as dry as we can throughout the summer so those plants have as much time to grow and produce as many seeds as possible. So wetland work it's a year-round task, and here we are, it's the end of waterfowl season. We're in early February, and we've already started preparing for this coming waterfowl season that opens in November. Today we're opening up our screw gates to draw down our wetlands. We're letting the water back out, let it go back into the river so we can promote that moist soil vegetation growing in these units. So right now we're opening this screw gate here at 3 Mile Slough at Keystone, and this screw gate was just installed. We've never had the opportunity to manipulate water levels on this slough, and it's just over 100 acres of a riverine wetland that we've never been able to get food in. They used to be able to cut some beaver dams at the end, drain it a little bit and plant some millet, but flood events have caused that to silt up. So this project's been a long time coming, but this summer we were able to put in a 800-foot pipeline that goes from where I'm at down this wheat strip to the Cimarron River. And now we'll be able to drain this, get some moist soil vegetation in it, and have some food for waterfowl. So this is going to be a great asset to hunters and waterfowl alike. So we're pretty excited about it. And that moist soil vegetation will act as food for waterfowl flying down through their migration in November and December and January. Not only is it a heavy seed producer, but the fibrous stalks that those plants produce, they are great food for invertebrates, and a lot of our waterfowl they're looking for those invertebrates. So invertebrates are still in there feeding on those stalks, and even last week we came out and did some invertebrate sampling and found a lot of chironomids and some small crustaceans and things like that that waterfowl just absolutely love. Ideally, If our drawdown has gone well, we have plants growing, in April and May. And we're out in our units looking at dikes. Do the dikes need repair? Do they have beaver damage? If it's been a flood year the past summer, they'll even have grass carp damage where they've been in there chasing roots and they've kind of rooted out a spot, much like a pig. We also have pig damage, and they can damage the dikes, and we don't want any irregularities on those dikes where when water comes over them and flood events, it'll find kind of a low spot and just eat through your dikes. A lot of times, these wetlands, they're in low-lying kind of floodplain areas, and it just doesn't dry up through the entire year, and repairs need to be made. So we have to get in there and do it by hand, the old-fashioned way with hip boots and a shovel and a 5-gallon bucket a lot of the times. We're here at another wetland unit, and we're drawing down this unit just like we were on the other one. But today we're having to contend with the original wetland manager, the beaver. He's taken exception to our dike and thought he'd remove this wall and get a little bit bigger house. So this summer we'll have to come back once this is dry, put chain link fence along that dike to keep him from digging into it. And he's also built several dams down along this channel where we drain out of. We've got her going our way, don't we? Beavers are, the original wetland creators. They started damming, low-lying creeks and things like that and creating these wetland meadows, and they're great habitat for lots of species. Unfortunately, they're kind of counterproductive in our man-made wetlands where they'll see something maybe that we don't see and they try to dam it up, whether we're drawing down a unit or maybe they're damming up a spillway because that's our low spot where we prevent washing out dikes, and they're like, hey, let me help you out a little bit and dam this up, and it's counterproductive from our end, so that they're a nuisance, in our man-made wetlands a lot of the times. So our pump it's unique to this area. We have to set it in with the track hoe, and most of them have a stationary pump site where that pump stays in their river or their creek, and they hook up a power unit to it each fall and just flip a switch. And ours, we have to get it out of the river because it wouldn't last through flood events. So just like managing the units, this is very dynamic because we're at the mercy of water levels and river surges. The pump is the same way, and it's got that concrete box that sits out in the river, and it's constantly catching silt, even to the point of where silt deposited inside the box and filled that up, and it's 9 feet tall, by 4 foot by 4 foot, and filled it up with sand. And we had to scoop, I think, 93 5-gallon buckets of sand out of it by hand, just to where we could start pumping water back through that thing. We'll place that pump on top of that concrete box, then we will back our diesel power unit up to it, hook it up, and then flip a switch, turn a key, and it's pumping water into that pipeline that runs up into our upper 5 units. And then these lowest units, it just gravity feeds, and it takes about 3 to 3.5 weeks, if they're all dry, to fill them all the way up to max capacity. And that's running the pump 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We'll usually start about mid-October, mid to late October. We'll try to get that pump placed in, and again, we're at the mercy of the river level because the pier that we take the track hoe and pump out on, it's only got about a foot of freeboard from normal lake level. So if we have a rain in Guthrie or Stillwater, a 2-inch rain, and it kind of sends a river surge down, or the lake's not at normal elevation, we have to wait for it to recede a little bit so we can walk out there and safely set that pump in. So ideally we do that in October, and then we'll start pumping, and units should be, at max capacity by mid-November. So that the wetland habitat, it's unique, because we are put so much effort into it throughout the year, throughout the growing season, and throughout late summer, getting that thing pumped up. But we want to have those valuable food resources available throughout the entire length of winter and waterfowl season, that as these birds migrate, south, that they find food available instead of, hey, it's all there for opening day, and then they get shot at and they get scattered and then they just disappear and we don't have any food or water left. So that's why it's kind of a year-long process that we put in so much time and effort into this thing. And we want to be here just as ready in December 1st as we are November 1st and January 1st also. So all of our units, they're roughly 18 inches deep, on average. Some of them range a little bit deeper, but that allows us to attract a lot of dabbling ducks. So mallards and pintails and teal and gadwalls and widgeon and things like that. The way we look at it is that these units were built with hunters' dollars, right, through the Sport Fish and Wildlife Restoration Acts. So we want to manage it for the hunters who paid for it. Folks will always question us, did you plant Japanese millet, or why didn't you plant Japanese millet, or how come you don't plant Japanese millet? And Japanese millet's great. It's a great attractant. It's not a great food source. It's kind of like feeding you candy bars. You know, I love it, and I'm not going to pass one up. But it's hard to make a 3-month migration, you know, off candy bars. I tell a lot of folks that kind of dabble in waterfowl hunting, but they're mainly deer hunters. I tell them, you know, you wouldn't go out to your property and doze off every oak tree you had to put a corn feeder. You know, you've already got the food source there. You got a much better food source, and that's essentially what we'd do if all we wanted to do was plant Japanese millet in here. We'd be wiping out all these great foods with all this great, you know, carbohydrates and amino acids and things like that in those plants to plant, you know, a Milky Way. We start in February, drawing these units down and trying to grow the best food for them, and then working on pumps and working on dikes, working on screw gates, and praying that we don't get a flood that wipes it all out. And then we put the pump in, and then the water starts coming, we're flooding food, and then November starts to hit, and these birds start to show up, and it's gratification, but it's so much relief. Like we made it to migration, we made it to waterfowl season, and the hunters can enjoy, you know, 3 months of waterfowl season out here. It doesn't matter, you know, what type of habitat you're managing, whether it's wetlands or uplands, you know, there's always difficulties, and we struggle with, a lot of times it's too much water here, and our folks out west, they're struggling with not enough water. You know, a lot of times they're thinking, hey, we can't pump these units. But where and when we can manage these types of habitat for wildlife and for sportsmen, I think it's our responsibility to do so, and to do so in the best way that we can.
In this scenario, our hunters are heading out on a quail hunt. It's the opening weekend, the weather is perfect, and they're ready to get after some birds. Everyone's excited to be on the hunt, but excitement can cause them to rush and do things like leaning their guns against an unsafe rest, pointing the muzzle in an unsafe direction, or mixing shells. So why is it important not to mix shells?
If you were to get a 20 gauge shell inside of a 12 gauge shell behind it, basically what typically happens when you fire a shotgun is the pellets, after the powder is ignited, the pellets are forced out by pressure out the end of the firearm. But when you block the end of the firearm, or it's going to be about halfway down the firearm, is about how far that 20 gauge shell is going to travel, the pressure is going to come out the easiest place on that firearm, and the weakest place, since the muzzle is blocked, the weakest place is going to be the action, which is literally going to be 2 to 3 inches away from your eyeball when aimed correctly. So when this explosion happens, there's a very good chance that it could be fatal, or it's going to typically maim the person that fires the firearm.
So how do you prevent this? Use the correct size ammunition for your gun. After the hunt, return your ammunition to its original box to make sure the wrong shells don't get loaded and fired. Carry and use only the shells that are suggested for your gun. Don't carry anybody else's shells, and don't borrow from others, as your hunting partner may be using a different gauge shotgun.
Against the bank, you said.
Let's see if we can hold in here as bad as this water is. You can just about use any bait you want to here.
They'd be feeding on shad up against the bank right there.
In tight. Right on the bank too.
them retrieve, or fast or slow? Or
They'll hit it just about as quick as it hits the water.
don't have to worry about the retrieve. Huh?
They're not too selective in their feeding. They're not like... Well, this lake is plenty rough now.
Yeah, if we was out in the wind, we could really have a good time, couldn't we? Don't really feel like my spinner's doing a whole lot of spinning sometimes.
That particular little old bait, sometimes you have to jerk it to get it started. There's a fish. Whoa.
Oh, there's one too.
All right.
I believe I'm on the rocks.
Mine feels like a little...
Doggone it, I broke that bait off already. Believe it or not.
They get expensive. Wow, look at there.
So Don's bait side tackle store get a little expensive after a while.
Look at there. Now, that's not a hybrid.
That's a nice
big old
fish.
white bass, I think.
Nice sandy. That's all right. That's the way to start the day right there.
Well, let's see what else we can find you here that'll work.
Doesn't take you long to get a jump on a guy.
There's another one.
All right.
Wow.
You can catch all your fish before I can even get my camera out.
Those fish, you're going to have to be quiet. They don't know there's a camera in the boat, or they wouldn't be biting.
Afraid we might get the old camera jinx on them.
Lid there now. You're going to have to be the lid man.
If I'm the lid man, I get to catch a few fish then too. It's got to be that way.
There's another one. Uh-oh. That's supposed to be your fish I caught there. Ah, good. He came off.
Yeah, you're one step ahead of me. You always throw right where I was going to throw.
There's one. What's the old saying of blind hogs and acorns?
I don't know if I need another lure now or not. Things are looking up here. Yeah, I caught the littlest one. Here now.
Boy, this wind's going to have us up on the bank. I'm going to take us around and come back into that again.
Okay. You said the fish that we were catching up here on this bank today were sand bass. Where do you think the big hybrids would be on a day like today?
Well, they're doing the same thing these little white bass are. They're getting food, and the wind's blowing the shad in on these banks,
So they'll be up on the bank too.
I think, well, I don't know. They're subject to being up on the bank. I'm
Chances-
hoping they're not, though. I've got a place up here. If they're congregated in it, we'll be able to catch some big fish.
Okay, good.
Look there. You're another behind, partner. You know,
I quit counting already.
You don't catch many big fish up on these banks. I don't know why. Occasionally they'll come into the bank, and I'm really kind of glad they don't, because they're not too selective in their eating pattern. It's just anything that'll get in front of them to eat. They seem to stay on these shelves out in the main lake, you know, where you've got 20 feet of water that comes up to 12 or 15.
Got hung on that another little rock out there. You said you don't catch very many big fish. I don't catch very many little fish on this bank myself. Not quite keeping up.
You're catching all I leave you. We may not, Mark, we may not catch any hybrids today, but they're the darndest fish you ever saw. You know, they say that a 10-pound hybrid has the same width tail as a 20-pound striper, so that's where he gets the fight and the ability to fight.
That big tail does.
But they just absolutely don't care what they feed on. I was talking with a friend. In fact, he's a guide up here at Big Hollow, and he had some people who live up there close to him go out on an island out here called Little Goat Island, and they sat out there in lawn chairs the other day and fishing for catfish with chicken livers, and caught 70 hybrids. I mean, some big ones.
Caught the hybrids on chicken
And
livers.
Saturday we had a hybrid tournament up here. We would have given our soul for one, you know.
Should have brought chicken livers with
We
you.
could have killed, yeah, we didn't have any chicken livers. But we've caught them on shad guts, we've caught them on crawfish, live shad, shiners. Spoons seem to be the most productive bait when you're in the fish. They're like a white bass. When you get into them, they're not bashful, they'll feed.
Just get into them and try to stay with them as long as you can catch them.
Yeah, well They seem to use certain areas to marshal, like those flats. There's a place up there that there's a hump comes up from about 40 feet of water up to 20. And they'll stay right on the edge of that, and I guess they push shad in there and then harvest them along that area.
Well, Don, do you have a favorite bait for hybrids out here, or do you just try what's working?
I guess it'd have to be a spoon. Now, the spoon would have to be my favorite bait. I think the most productive fishing, however, is with live shad. That old shad holder we've got right there. You know, shad are hard to keep alive. Most of them will die before you can get them in the boat. Just throwing them in a live well won't keep them alive. They certainly work better. They certainly work better when they're good and lively. So if you can get good live shad and drift them on those flats, I think that'll catch more hybrids than probably any way of fishing you can do. And,
well, when shad's the main forage base, anything in the lake will hit them, won't they?
Everything picks on a poor old shad.
I noticed there were a lot of seagulls in here when we moved in, and now they're gone. Can you chase the seagulls up here for hybrids like they do in Texoma and lakes like that on the stripers?
Yeah, anytime you see seagulls that are real active diving to the water, you're going to bet that the shad are in there, and if the shad are in there, then your white bass and hybrids are subject to being in there. These windy points are particularly good, and we'll find here in a few minutes we'll go out to these flats up here, and we ought to see a lot of seagulls there, and if we do, there'll be some fish in there. This wind's blowing shad in, that's what they're in feeding on. This is a great place and a great way for young fishermen to start because there's a lot of action.
Oh yeah.
I had my grandkids out last night, and I bet they caught 30 or 40 up there.
I bet they had a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, they have a ball.
That's good to get kids out and let them catch some fish and enjoy it.
The old kids have fun doing this too.
Yeah. Doesn't matter how old you are, when you're fishing, you're still a kid, aren't you?
Right. I don't know when I've seen the foliage any prettier.
Well, we hope today's stories remind you that Oklahoma is a perfect place to adventure in. So no matter how you choose to enjoy our state's incredible natural world, remember, your adventure starts with Outdoor Oklahoma. Okay, that's a wrap, right? Outdoor Oklahoma is produced by the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation and is proud to serve and be funded entirely by sportsmen and women and outdoor enthusiasts who love and appreciate all things wild in the great state of Oklahoma.